Thank you, Alex. Well, my name is Nancy Landon, and as Doug mentioned, I spent my career in public education pretty much. I recently retired in January of 2023, and so I've really enjoyed the time that I've had with my family. I spent a lot of time working and being stressed out, and so I get to spend time with my grandchildren because I feel like I kind of shortchanged my children during that time. So that's been great. But today I've got a couple handouts for you. I've got two in your packet, and so that's what I'm going to go over. Not the first one is a handout that was prepared by the State Department of Education. That handout kind of goes over the whole funding formula. And I know you didn't come here to hear the funding formula today, so you're lucky I'm not going to try to do that to you. But I do encourage you to take the time once the session starts. I know that the State Department of Ed does go through and do a training in House Ed and also in Senate Ed on the funding formula, and I really encourage you to try to sit through that if you can. So you've been through it a few times, and so you have to listen to it a few times to get a good understanding about the public school funding in Idaho. That's been near and dear to my heart for 35 years, so I know quite a bit about it, and I've seen it change over the years. But I do encourage you to take the time to go to Senate Ed or go to House Ed and listen to the Department of Ed give you that talk, because they're very knowledgeable. And that one handout gives you that information. I'm not going to go over it today. I'm going to go over the information that's in the table. And the reason I want to address that is I feel like there's a lot of confusion about how virtual charter schools and how charter schools are funded in Idaho compared to traditional schools. So I'm going to try to talk a little bit about that briefly to highlight where those differences are and where the similarities are, because what you're going to hear today is they're much more similar in nature than they are different. So the handout that I'm going to go over is this. Did you pull that up? So it looks like this. It's the table, and I'm just going to briefly go over that table with you. So the first thing that I want to kind of make you think in your mind is there's public schools and charter schools are funded in what I consider like four main categories. And I look at that as support units, which support units are students, and I'll talk about that. And then there's salary-based apportionment. That's the funding that goes out to allocation for staff. Then there's transportation allocation to fund your busing operations and to provide delivery of virtual instruction. And then there's also what I call facility funding. I won't go into a lot of detail on that. But then the big one that I consider a big chunk of the money is also what I call earmarks. And so I've got that on that page as well. And so I want to kind of wrap your hand around what those differences are. And so let's start with support units. So support units are kids, okay? And that's how we fund most of the education in Idaho. So support units drive the majority of the funding. If it's not the support units, then it's usually your best 28 weeks average daily attendance or your full-term average daily attendance. Support units are funded based on the age or the grade level of the students. So if you're kindergarten, you get funded at a certain level. If you're a secondary kid, you get funded at a different level. And just so you're aware, a secondary kid generates more funding than a kindergarten kid. So they consider you need more units to fund a high school. So when I was working, in average in our district, it took about on an average 19 kids to get a unit in the Boise School District. Now that's different across the state, because it's based on the size of your school. So there's some tables in there to help you, and I've got the code reference there. It's 331002. But what that says is, if you're a smaller district, we're going to fund you a little bit better, because we need to give you additional funds because you don't have the economies of scale that a large district has. Keep in mind, those tables are the same for charter schools, virtual schools, and traditional schools. There's not separate tables. They're all the same. The one thing that I will tell you that's different is that if you're a secondary charter school, there's a table in there that says if you serve less than 100 kids, you cannot get below 12 units, a divisor of 12. If you're a traditional school, you can get some special funding. So that's one area where they kind of did want to encourage people to break off and do some smaller secondary schools just to generate some funding. So that's one area where charter schools are held to a higher standard than traditional buildings. The other area is charter schools are not protected. So the gentleman earlier talked about, well, if kids leave, there's some protection involved. Charter schools are not protected when it comes to support units or loss of students. Traditional schools are protected. And what that means is if you lose attendance, like 3% or more of your population, you get some protection for the following year. They protect you for 1 year at 97% of your prior year's attendance. What's important to note about that is the schools pay for that. The districts put in money to cover that. They all throw in a part of their money to have that benefit to them. Years ago, that was not the case. The state used to pick up that tab, and that is no longer the case. However, just so you're aware, charter schools are not protected when they lose students or if something happens. So during the pandemic, they were not protected. Okay, that's an important note. The other thing to know is charters are held to that they cannot grow more than 40 units, support units in 1 year. So if something drastic happens, which happened during the pandemic, they did eliminate that rule during the pandemic, but now it's back in place. You cannot grow more than 40 units in 1 year. So other than that, to generate support units in this state or to generate the money, they're both treated the same. You have to have 23 kids to get a unit at kindergarten. You have to have 18.5 kids to get a unit at secondary. You have to have 12 kids to get a unit if you're teaching an alternative school. They're treated exactly the same. So there's no specialized funding separate from the two. And the reason I want to say units are so important is they drive the majority of the funding in the state of Idaho. So students drive the money. And so what that means is it pays for your discretionary money. Units determine how much discretionary money a school or a charter is going to get. It determines how much they're going to get for a health allocation. And the big one, it determines how much they're going to get for their salary-based apportionment allocation. So the units are very important when it comes to determining how much money a school district or a charter is going to get. The other thing that's important to note is charters and traditionals are held to the same standard on how much a kid has to attend school. So in order to get counted in attendance as a one full-time kid, you have to attend at least 4 hours a day. If you want to be considered a half kid, you have to go 2.5 hours a day. Now, in the case of a virtual student, you have the option to use hours of attendance or percent of completion of your project in the school. So they can do one of two ways to count those students. But again, very similar, and same is true for virtual schools that are in the school districts. Same exact rules, no different. So what I'm trying to get across is the rules are pretty much the same when it comes to support units and generating those units for both types of programs. The next area I want to talk about is the salary-based apportionment. And that's another big pot of the money. And so the big salary-based apportionment, you determine how many staff you're allocated is based on your units. And I've kind of given you those factors in there. If you have 1 unit, they'll give you 1.021 instructional allocation for an instructional person, 0.079 for a pupil personnel, and what that means is a social worker, a nurse, a counselor, somebody like that, 0.075 for an administrator, and then 0.375 for a classified person. So for every unit, you get 0.375 of a classified person funded. So keep in mind when you think of your classified folks, you're thinking of your custodians, your library assistants, your nurse assistants. You're thinking of your janitors, your facility people, your maintenance people, all those kinds of people, your office support staff. All of those are rolled into the classified allocation. And so those are the kind of areas, no different for virtual charters or traditional, same formula. The only place that you're going to see a difference where they've kind of held charters and virtuals kind of to a higher standard again, they are not allowed to generate additional staff if they're a small school. So in Idaho code, it says if you're a small district and you have less than 20 units, you get an additional 0.5 added to your allocation for instruction. And if you're under 40 units, you get an additional 0.5 of an instructional person, plus you get an additional 0.5 an administrative person. Now keep in mind, that is only for true districts. Now what I find interesting about that anymore is if you go look at the enrollments of traditional districts and charters, many districts are the exact same size as charters. or larger. So you can look at, there's lots and lots of districts that have 300 and 400 kids in them. And we have lots of charters that have 300 and 400 kids in them. And so really, I don't know why we have that difference anymore, why they're not getting that extra staff allocation added on. But I will tell you the reason I think that may be the case is there's one provision in the code that says if you're a district, you are required to use it or you lose it on your salary-based apportionment allocation. So they give you a chunk of money based on your staff and your units, and then they say you must spend that on those categories. And if you have some flexibility, you can spend up to less than 9.5%, but you have to spend it or use it or lose it. Charter schools and virtual schools are not held to that same standard. And I believe the reason for that, and it was set in place early on, years and years ago when charter schools first came about, and the reason for that is specifically so that charters could have the flexibility to do what they wanted, be innovative. The whole idea with the charter was let us get them the money and let them do things different. That's what we want them to do. We don't want them to keep being traditional schools. We want them to do something different. Give them the flexibility to move that money around. The other reason I believe that happened, and you legislators can speak to that if you were around at the time, is that they don't have a local funding source. So they don't have the ability to go grab property taxes or supplemental levies or some of those other local property sources that traditional districts do. So that's another reason I think they provided charters and virtuals with the ability to have that flexibility. So keep in mind that is one area where charters are different when it comes to the salary allocation. The other, I'm not even, that's too complicated. So, and then the next area I want to talk briefly about deals with the transportation funding. Again, there's a lot of talk about transportation. Virtual charter schools, charter schools and traditional schools are treated exactly the same when it comes to transportation funding. There's no difference. You have to determine, as if you're a charter school, what your boundary is. You're still held to the same standards. Your child can't be has to be farther than 1.5 miles away, but you're held to the same standard as a regular traditional school. No different. The only difference in this one is virtual schools do have the ability to apply for a transportation reimbursement to cover costs associated with providing delivery of the instructional model to the child. So they will fill out a claim just like any other district or charter once a year to the State Department of Ed, and they will claim those costs and get reimbursed at a 85% reimbursement cost. The only other difference is charter schools are allowed to get an advance payment. And the reason for that is because all your transportation costs are paid in arrears, meaning you incurred those costs in 24, 25, and you're not going to get paid for them until 25, 26. So if you're a new charter school and you start out, you're not going to have any money coming in because you didn't have a prior year. And so the legislature made the law to allow you to have advance payments. Other than that, transportation rules are exactly the same. So what I'm trying to get at is, if you see, there's not a lot of differences in the way that the schools are funded. Very little differences in funding opportunities. Facilities are a little different, of course, because as you know, traditional schools and traditional districts can bond. They can go to the voters and they can bond. And so that's what they do, and they have a different mechanism. As you know, the Modernization Fund was established 2 years ago, and that money has all been distributed to traditional districts. And then they have some property tax relief money that has been given to them that is not available to charters or charter virtuals. Charters and virtuals do have another funding mechanism for facilities, and that is they get paid $400 per ADA. And if you're a virtual, you have to apply for that and get paid at 50% of that if you have costs associated with buildings and facilities. Again, very little differences. And then the one part that I really want to bring to your attention is all the earmarks. And so I have those on the next page, on the back page. And I want you to look at all of those earmarks, because those are a big part of what the legislature, what you are passing each year. They're a big chunk of money if you look at that. And as you can see, there is no difference in how that money flows to charters and virtuals versus how it flows to traditional schools or districts. There is no difference. The reporting is exactly the same. The accountability measurements are exactly the same. So just keep that in mind. Everything with each one of these, they have to follow all of the things that have set up in legislation and passed each year. They have to follow the same rules and specifications that the legislature set forth. So you can see there's a big line of them, what I tried to do is just tell you how much what you're supposed to budget for those. And as you can see, it's all based on students, how many students you have, or your staff. In the case of some professional development, they base it on your staff counts. But again, it's important for you to see there's not a lot of difference. And then I did want to highlight, again, that the big difference between charters, and you all know this, and charter virtuals, is that they don't have the ability to access any local revenue. Okay, that's the big difference. The one thing I did want to kind of just bring to your attention, in case you weren't aware, is that in this state right now, or in 24-25, we had about 318,000 students enrolled. Of that, 275,000 of them are sitting in traditional schools. 43,000 are sitting in charters. Of those in charters, 15,000 are virtual students. 35% of the students that are in the charter school are sitting in virtual schools right now. At least that was as of 24-25. And so overall, in the state, if you look at that, we've got a total population of virtual kids of 21,000 kids, or 6% of the total population of the students in Idaho in 24-25 were in virtual schools. So that's a pretty good number if you think about that. So I haven't seen the latest number. The other thing that I think is important for you to know, virtuals are not just charters. Traditional schools are in the game, and they're getting in the game pretty big because of choice. Parents want something different, and traditional schools have heard that loud and clear. They're seeing, when I was still in the business, it was more about parents wanting flexibility or wanting something different for their kids. That's why I asked that question, because that was the big thing for us. Is in Boise, parents wanted flexibility. They wanted to do something different. And the other thing that I found with Boise is it's all secondary kids. I mean, they tried to do an elementary program and a secondary, and the elementary's pretty much petered out. There's 5 kids in it, maybe, if we're lucky. But it's still the secondary kids that are in at the Boise. But what's important is there's almost 19 online programs now in the districts, and there's 9 in the charters right now. So you can see that numbers continuing to grow. And I will, in my opinion, it's partially a money issue for the traditional schools. They see it. It's a money issue. They can keep the kids there, and they can generate the funds, so they're not losing those enrollment dollars, as well as providing choice for their parents and giving them opportunities. But you're seeing more and more of those programs pop up in the traditional schools, and I think part of it was they didn't know what they were doing until the pandemic hit, and then they had to figure it out real fast. And so it's given them the opportunity to enter that market as well. And all the models look different. So they look different in the traditional school, and they look different in the charter schools. But what's important to note that it's definitely a program that has continued to grow in this state. And I will tell you from experience, which I was quite surprised. I have 4 children, and they now have children, and I'm surprised out of those 4, they've all picked different methods. I was like, you need to go to this traditional public school like I did and you did, and that's not what they want anymore. And I have twin boys, and they have 2 sets of kids, and they're all doing different things, and they live in the same town. So I will tell you that choice is here to stay, and it's amazing to watch these young people that they want to do different things. So with that, I'll stand for questions.
So just maybe for clarification, so the Wilder School To my understanding, it's not a charter school, it's a district-run online program.
Correct.
I see a nod, yes. So then my question is, those differences between a district-run online school or program, is that funded the same way that a virtual charter is funded?
Yes, they are funded. Their kids are counted exactly the same, with the exception is if they, if you're so small, you can't generate. But in his case, what happens, those kids are just a building. So when you have a district virtual, they're just a building. So instead of being Monroe, it's now Boise Online. It's just a building, and they're counted, and all those kids get counted into the big cod. So what's important to note about that is it may very well be that a district, they don't have that use it or lose, they have that use it or lose it. So they might be generating some additional funds because of that online, but then they're able to use those throughout their entire district operation. Yes.
I was wondering if you can explain to me, you were saying that the charter schools cannot grow more than 40 units
In a year.
in a year, and can you maybe explain why that is?
Well, I can tell you what I think the reason is, because that's been around a while, and please, any legislator that's in the room, tell me if I'm incorrect. But I will tell you that I think it was because at the time of the establishment, school districts were concerned about a big loss of students all at once. And so they kind of compromised and said, okay, charters can't grow rather quickly all at once. And I believe at the time, one of them that was a kind of one that fear was the Gooding one. Gooding's a teeny little district, and Gooding was opening up a charter school, and it would have taken out their entire public school. Would you? Okay, thank you.
One of the criticisms that we hear related to charter schools and their funding, particularly the smaller ones that may reach that small school divisor benefit, is that charter schools can cap their enrollment and not take more kids, where a district school, has to take in all the kids that are going to come through, the door. So I don't know if that ability has impacted anything structurally in the funding formula for charter schools, either related to use it or lose it, or any of the other provisions.
So what you're saying is because they're capped, has that done, I think what that cap, so they've capped out, they don't have enough room. Again, what that's done is that's kept those other students in the traditional schools, I believe. So I'm not sure if that has anything to do with the use it or lose it. I believe a lot of the use it or lose it had to do with innovation. I mean, that's what I heard when it was passed years and years ago. The talk was, let's let them have some freedom. Let's quit telling them what to do on every little turn, and let them have some freedom and let them make their own decisions. And so that's what I think was the reason for that. And I could be wrong, but yeah.
So one of the concerns that had come up in our education committee last year was just the classification of busing and the buses. Is there a way to kind of, when so much is online, people have a hard time saying, so now why do they get money for buses? Can that be kind of fixed?
Well, I think at the time that it was kind of just put in there to have a placeholder for it, and at the time they thought, okay, well, we have a delivery method. We're going to deliver the product, but it's a different type of delivery method. It's electronically done, it's internet. And so they didn't know where to put that, and so they stuck it into the transportation legislation, into that part of Idaho code. Certainly that part can be pulled out into another code section, but it's kind of, that's where it's been placed, and it's been there for years. It's always been in that location, and I think it was because they looked at it as we're transporting the product electronically instead of transporting through a bus.
And we get that. It almost got eliminated though.
Right, and that was the problem. And so they put it out there, and instead of finding a new home for it, they just tried to eliminate it. And so, I don't know if that was by accident or what was going on there, but definitely it can be moved to a different location. If people don't feel like it belongs in the yellow bus area of the Idaho code, you can move it to another area. But what happened was, I think it was proposed to be eliminated, but not being moved elsewhere, at least in the legislation that I reviewed.
First, thank you so much for being here. This has been really helpful. Lots of these questions I get all the time and I can't answer them, so thank you. Can you, I'm looking at the section on the facility funding, and I'm trying to picture in my mind what $400 per bus 28-week ADA looks like for a charter school versus what we're doing for a public school. Could you give like story, numbers, some context that would help me picture that better?
I cannot, but what I can tell you, that data is available. I don't have it with me, but what I can tell you is it's available on the State Department of Ed's website. And what I can do, if they've got a list of everybody that attended, I can send that information out to you. I can grab it for you and show you kind of what did the school districts get as it pertains to the modernization funds. Now remember, those modernization funds are going to are 10 years. And then compare it to what you're going to get on 400. So say you have 400 ADA in a charter, you take that times $400, that's what you get each year, keep in mind.
So that's ongoing.
That's ongoing money, yes. And in the case of the public, or the traditional schools, I should say, everybody took the money up front. So all the money's been distributed, and it's being used, or it's already been used, or it's sitting in an account earning interest, getting ready to be used. But they will not receive another payment for 10 years.